It's been a very busy offseason for the Philadelphia Flyers, who now seem to admit they are in a full rebuild. Rachel Donner of Locked On Flyers joins us to discuss what this means going forward for the Flyers and some of the moves they made during this offseason.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can now find us on SiriusXM on the SXM app, so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. It is my pleasure to welcome in my usual Friday co-host here on the show, but here talking about the Philadelphia Flyers. She is a co-host of Locked On Flyers, Rachel Donner. And Rachel, you can't say it's been a dull offseason in Philadelphia.
It has not, man. We went from being pretty down in the dumps to, I would say, hopeful about the future, if such a thing is possible in Flyers land.
Well, okay, so the first thing that happens in the offseason is this team makes some trades. You move on from Ivan Provorov and Kevin Hayes and Tony DeAngelo. What did those trades mean to you, and do you feel they did a good job?
Yeah, well, first off, I want to put an asterisk there because Tony DeAngelo was not traded. He was bought out.
Right.
And then Carolina does what Carolina does and be obnoxious and then just sign him for less than the trade value would have been. However, with the Ivan Provorov trade, I think that was just something that was coming when Danny Briere and Keith Jones took over as the stewards of the Flyers. They basically said everybody was on the trading block. We'll listen to anybody about anybody. And so I think that there were a few guys that were definitely higher on that list to get traded. Ivan Provorov was one of them. And in a three-way deal with the Columbus Blue Jackets and the Kings, wound up with another first round pick in the draft, which was phenomenal, and got, a bunch of, salary dump guys from LA with a little bit of potential. So I think the biggest issue in that return is goaltender Cal Peterson. Not sure exactly where he's going to fit into the Flyers plan, but I think, getting a solid bottom pairing defenseman in Sean Walker and a prospect in Helge Grans, I think, that part of the return was pretty good. And like I said, we got another first round pick, and considering that the Flyers did not have a second round pick in the draft, it was really good to get that.
And as far as, these three moves are concerned, it seems to me that we finally have an admission that, yeah, this is a full rebuild.
Oh, no question. And I think that, there was a lot of consternation right after the trade deadline when Chuck Fletcher basically got nothing done. There was a season ticket holder town hall that did not go well. And the message was clear from the fans that, we need a rebuild, and you better call it a rebuild because we're going nowhere. Just spinning around doing nothing at this point.
And how do you feel this fits in with, the present coach, who is more known for winning now than he is for rebuilds?
That's a big question, because I think at the beginning of last season, I don't think that that's what John Tortorella signed up for. I don't think that's what Chuck Fletcher sold him on. And things obviously turned out very differently. And I think this upcoming year is going to be a real test to see if Tortorella can stick it out for this kind of a rebuild and see if it fits well for him. I honestly would not blame him if he's like, no, I just don't have time for this. I'm about to retire. It's okay. We'll, amicably part ways at the end of the season. He could also dive right in and be a huge part of it and surprise us all. I would not be shocked if things go either way.
Well, that'll certainly be something that's interesting to watch. The draft, obviously, the big move, landing Michkov, which, you're smiling just when I say the name. Talk to me about it.
Yeah, honestly, I think there was a little bit of surprise, not a ton of surprise when he dropped to 7th overall. There's definitely a lot of risk there with him being under contract in the KHL with a minimum of 3 years before he could come over. But when you're a Flyers team who's just starting a rebuild, that timing is perfect. And so it was a risk worth taking, and Danny Briere happily took it. Michkov seemed very pleased with the selection. And I think one of the interesting points that we made on the show about it is that there had been a lot of chatter that maybe he would want to go to Washington and play with Ovi. And Washington had the very next pick in the draft, and the Flyers weren't the type of team that would take this kind of risk. So it could happen. Maybe Michkov wants to establish himself with his own team. That the Capitals are Ovi's team. And so why would Michkov with that kind of skill, want to go somewhere where it's already somebody else's team? No, with the Flyers, he has a chance to make it his team, to come in and be that offensive spark to really turn things around and take that next step in a rebuild. And I think both sides were pleased.
You mentioned the offensive skills. Talk to us a little bit about that. What are the Flyers looking at when they project 2-3 years down the road, him coming to North America?
Oh yeah, he's just so tremendously skilled. He's super smart. He can read the plays like light years ahead of time. He's really smart with his shot selection. I just think he's dynamic. He's fun. He's going to score a lot of goals. He's going to assist on a lot of goals and just be the glue that finally puts this team together to take that next step in a playoff push and a Stanley Cup run.
Wow, you said those words. That's very good.
It could happen. It really could happen. And I do think that hope and that positivity is there.
Well, it wasn't there a year ago, so that
is true.
A step forward. What is the next step in the rebuilding process? Because the outlook for this season doesn't necessarily look very promising, but what would make this upcoming season a successful one for the Flyers?
I think this season is all about prospect development, that there are several prospects that have been drafted over the last couple of years that are ready to take that next step and could potentially get some playing time with the Flyers, but certainly will at the Phantoms level in the AHL. And just to focus on that and make sure all of those guys are being set up in the best way possible so that the next year after that, the Flyers are really starting to make big improvements. And so that's really the number one thing. And then in the meantime, spend this year, see how the veterans are tying in with some of the younger guys, see who it makes sense to keep around for the future and see who it makes sense to jettison at trade deadline this upcoming year. And, I think there could be several big moves made at trade deadline. There were a couple that almost happened this offseason that did not. And so maybe some of those guys will be on the way out the door at that point, closer to the end of their contracts. I think that's really what's happening.
Who are some of those younger players that you were referring to that, may get a cup of coffee now and maybe a year away?
I think Bobby Brink is one of the top guys on that list. Real strong forward, played for Denver in NCAA hockey. And, he had an injury this past season, so did not play a full season at the AHL level, but steadily improved and really hit his stride at the end of the AHL season this past year. He's gotten a couple of games at the NHL level, and I think maybe mid-season he'll be ready to take that next step offensively. We've got a couple of defensemen, several of them actually, that could be battling for spots. We've got Ronnie Attard, we've got Adam Ginning, and Emil Andre, who was a second-round draft pick from a couple of years ago, been playing over in Sweden. And they're going to try and make a big push to have him take that next step as well. He was the captain for Team Sweden in World Juniors, and so has a real strong pedigree.
All right. Well, it sounds like there's an interesting season ahead in Philadelphia. Rachel, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
You can find Locked On Flyers pretty much any social media network out there at Locked On Flyers. We are everywhere these days. And I am on the network formerly known as Twitter at @rmiriam, and you can find me there.
All right, Rachel, thank you so much. Always a pleasure, and looking forward to seeing you again next Friday.
Absolutely.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting on Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting on everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. And no matter what baseball team you root for, you'll find plenty of opportunities to bet, great odds, parlays, all different kinds of bets on FanDuel. It's all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball.